Hello everyone and welcome back to another video where today I want to talk a little bit about the ratings for the Doctor Who season finale, Reality War. We got these yesterday and I want to cover them now because I've got some stuff to say about this. Obviously, I've kind of been refraining from talking about the viewing figures too much the last couple of weeks, mainly because I feel like I end up saying the same things every week, but I have some interesting things to kind of say this week, and I think this proves one of my hypotheses and what was, in my opinion, the era's biggest mistake. But before we get into that, do me a teeny tiny little favour and subscribe if you're new. We just hit 28,100 subscribers and we're trying to get to 30,000, so we're less than 2,000 away now, so any support would be greatly appreciated on helping us get to our goal. But let's dive right in. Ratings. Doctor Who receives boost for series finale as Ncuti Gatwa departs the TARDIS. Doctor Who Season 2 concluded on BBC One on Saturday 31st of May with the Reality War, which scored overnight audience of 2.2 million. The consolidated rating, which will include iPlayer devices and catch-up, will be released 9th of June. This figure does not include those who watched in cinemas across the country. Overall, it was by far the BBC's biggest show of the evening and the second highest of the day across all channels, only behind the Britain's Got Talent final on ITV1. The Reality War becomes the second highest rating episode of the series, only behind the Interstellar Song Contest, which obviously was sandwiched between Eurovision and the FA Cup, so that was naturally going to receive a boost. But the reason I wanted to talk about this is for two key reasons. For one thing, I think the fact that it was the second most viewed thing of the day, and by far the BBC's most viewed thing of the day, even with all of its die-hard fans at the cinema, is a good sign. Obviously, had it not been in cinemas, we can guarantee that that number would probably be maybe a couple 100,000 higher. Obviously, we haven't had the box office revenue for Doctor Who just yet, at least not what I can see, but I will cover that when it comes out. But also, to me, it proves the biggest mistake that this era made, and I've been saying it since day one. The midnight and 8 AM releases were a terrible idea. I said this at the time, I said it when the midnight thing was announced, and I said it with 8 AM as well. They fracture the audience, they lead to lower viewing figures, they make the show feel like less of an event. This episode was arguably the first that felt like an event because it was broadcast simultaneously for everyone, released in cinemas, and no one knew how it was going to end. Fundamentally, that makes it a lot more urgent viewing than having it on iPlayer 12 hours beforehand. No wonder the viewing figures were kneecapped when you do that. Like, it's no surprise that that's going to happen because people will watch it and then they'll post online about it, and then people will see those posts online and go, well, I don't have to watch it anymore, and then they won't bother. When something airs live, especially something like this where we didn't know how it's going to end, obviously we didn't know whether Ncuti would regenerate, obviously there were rumours, but for the vast majority of the audience, they didn't know whether Ncuti was going to leave, they certainly didn't know that Billy Piper was going to be at the end. It made it more of an event for people, it made it more of a, oh, I've got to see what happens. And that's reflected in this. Now, am I going to say that this viewing figure is amazing? Again, no, I'm sure they would want a bit higher. But I'll be interested to see how the consolidated viewing figures perform given the reveal at the end, which again, you know my opinion on, but regardless of my opinion on it, I can guarantee it will be a ratings draw, at least in the short term. Part of me does worry, though, that if that is the case, that the BBC will learn all the wrong lessons from it, effectively that the only way Doctor Who can continue is to do these stunt castings every few years, relying on an ever-decreasing pool of nostalgic talent to put bums in seats, essentially. That does concern me. However, I think for me, the bigger takeaway is Doctor Who did its second best performing episode of the series when it was actually broadcast the normal way. I think this, to me, is proof that the midnight and 8 AM thing just does not work for Doctor Who. I know people will say, oh, but, you know, other Star Wars and Marvel shows air at, like, 8 AM or midnight. And the fundamental difference is Doctor Who is and always has been a TV show primarily. And as much as linear TV is dying, there is something to be said for everyone experiencing an event, especially like a regeneration, at the same time for the first time. That's why I assume they did this sort of simultaneous broadcast, so that people were talking about it before anyone got a chance to see it. We all saw it at the same time. Interestingly, this was also Britain's Got Talent's lowest viewership ever last night, down over 1 million on last year's finale, with just 4.1 million viewers. Now, obviously Doctor Who was lower than that, but again, that's not really a surprise. Whenever you put the two up against each other, Britain's Got Talent is always going to win because it's more mass appealing and mainstream. That's not a surprise. However, 4.1 million being the absolute peak of Saturday night kind of proves to you that TV is dying across the board, which it is. And to prove that even further, we actually have a very handy list of all of the overnights for Britain's Got Talent to date. And obviously, as you can see here, 2007, 11 million. Going through the years, it gets lower and lower, slowly and slowly and slowly, until we reach 2025 with 4.1 million. And yet, no one ever makes videos saying Britain's Got Talent is woke with a massive down arrow on it, because it's not a massive culture war issue. You could make the exact same videos, in theory, about Britain's Got Talent, and they would have just as much merit. You could say, oh look guys, look at how much lower this is compared to where it was 12 years ago. And the argument would be exactly the same. In 2009 it got 16 million, and now we're at 4. But of course, that logic only ever gets applied to one show on British television. That one show is Doctor Who, because Doctor Who's the only one that's a culture war talking point. No one talks about any other show like this, because it's unrealistic to expect these viewing figures in this day and age. But that's my little soapbox rant about that. Doctor Who was still the second best performing show of the day, and I imagine the consolidated figures will bring this one up quite handsomely. And as I said, the fact that it did that while being at the cinema when its diehards were all in the cinemas is an even better signal that yes, this show will continue. I'll be interested to see how much money they made off of the screening. Last year it was about, I think, 270,000 roughly, I think. And this time they've almost doubled the number of cinemas it's in, so I'll be interested to see how that affects things. But yeah, to clarify, I'm also not saying that Britain's Got Talent will be cancelled because its ratings are lower. I'm just using that as an example of something you could say if this logic that's only ever applied to Doctor Who was applied to other things. You have to look at it in context with everything else. Britain's Got Talent, despite having its lowest viewing figure on record, was still the number one show of the day, and Doctor Who, with, you know, one of its lower viewing figures, was second, and the highest for the BBC. You have to look at it in context with everything else. You can't just take a number that's lower than it was 12 years ago and go, see? Because it doesn't really work like that. Like, yeah, obviously, that's true of everything. That's true of literally every other show that's been on 10 years plus on British television. You'd be hard-pressed to find a show that's been airing consistently for the last 10 years that pulls the same numbers it did back then. It's not a thing. It just doesn't happen because television is just not in the same place. But yeah, I think my major takeaway is just that the streaming first approach for Doctor Who was the wrong one, and I kind of hope with whatever happens with the Disney deal and obviously where the show goes next, that approach gets ditched and we go back to the simultaneous release at around 7 PM in the UK. It worked fine for the 60th, it worked fine for the specials, and evidently it works better even with current Doctor Who. So ultimately, I think that just makes sense. And I guarantee you, if you do that, you will see a boost to the numbers. I can guarantee that, because this proves it. This proves that approach hampered any growth that the show could have had, in my opinion, at least in the UK. It made it just feel like another disposable streaming thing, rather than the event piece of television that I think they wanted it to be. And I think that is the biggest takeaway for me, is this whole idea was bad. I understand why they tried it, and maybe for season 2 they couldn't get out of it, and Disney requested, you know, that there was some kind of international broadcast time. However, 8 AM for season 2 was also 3 AM in America, which to me is a baffling choice. Like, when they made the midnight decision, we were all kind of under the assumption that it was for the benefit of the Americans, and then the Americans got it at 3 AM and the Brits got it at 8 AM, which is not ideal for either. And obviously I'm not saying that that means that, oh, so those are the only two countries. No, but those are the two countries with the biggest Doctor Who, like, populations. I guess you could say Australia has a big Doctor Who population, and they were winning, to be fair, but they were like the only ones. It was them in New Zealand that came out of this good. Everyone else was in a way worse position. All of Europe, it's just a mad decision. And I really hope that with whatever Doctor Who does next, they cut that off. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think about this. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to give it a like, comment down below your thoughts, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.